Before we start this video, I would like to introduce the country simulation to anyone who may not already know what it is. The country simulation, or TCS, is a multiplayer military, economic and political simulation game where using a combination of an easy-to-use, logical and realistic economic simulation spreadsheet, as well as a lively, active and well-structured Discord community, we are able to create long-term alternate history simulations where you can lead your nation from a lowly state in Central America in the early 1900s to a major player in American geopolitics by the 1970s. Or better yet, you could cure the major problems of a dying state such as the Ottoman Empire to restore it to its once present glory. In TCS we've even had reformations of the Roman Empire to differing levels of success. So whether you seek to conquer the world with an overwhelming force, utilise well thought out economic strategies to control the world's supply of energy, or perhaps even you simply wish to be a champion of peace, allowing your neutral state to host vital diplomatic conferences to decide the fate of the world, every goal has its place in TCS, and we look forward to watching your nation's story unfold. If this all sounds interesting to you, you can find all the relevant information about how to join our thriving community in the description below. Now that that's out of the way, hello and welcome to TCS Season 14. Whether you're new to the server or an experienced player, this video is here to act as a deep dive into all the new content, rules and goals we have in the hopes of making TCS Season 14 our best season yet. Coming hot off the heels of what has been respected as one of the server's greatest seasons in TCS Season 13, there is certainly a high bar to hit, and I hope that the new seasons we have put in place can aid in achieving such a level of quality within the season. Without further ado, I am your host and co-owner TJ, and let's head into the video. TCS Season 14 Patch Notes. As with every TCS season, we have some new minor changes that impact the balance, flow and realism of the server. These changes, however minor, can make a huge impact on the season, as apparent by our first change. New data sources. TCS has long been held together using estimates, guesswork and any old source from the internet. This has of course worked well enough for us in the past, but you just can't help but wonder how different the server could have been all these years with accurate numbers from real life. This is why it's possibly the most important change of the season. TCS is now committed to its usage of accurate sources that must be directly approved by River and myself before their usage in any TCS system. The list of sources currently is as follows: the Madison Historical Statistics Project, the Clio Infra Project, the Population Statistics Databank, Statista.com. This list is ever growing and any changes to it will be noted in the sheet development channel on the TCS Discord server. The scrapping of EMR interest. For those unaware, TCS Season 13 was in the eyes of many the season of the bank. This is the case thanks to how EMR interest worked last season. Essentially, for every dollar you had saved in your emergency monetary reserve, aka your treasury, you would get back a percentage of your money which equated to half of your interest rate worth. If you had an interest rate of 50%, then each year your emergency monetary reserve would jump up 25%. This became a large problem with the balance of last season, as such nations such as Switzerland would encourage nations to store their money within Switzerland, giving both Switzerland themselves and the storing nation lucrative amounts of money back in interest payments. Switzerland, being a small nation, could easily use these vast riches to overfund their education, social security and other welfare policies in a way that just allowed them to permanently exponentially grow with no drawbacks. By the end of the season, it would become the meta to have a 50% interest rate, leading to an average interest rate across players of around 30%. For all of these reasons combined, in the spirit of a more realistic, fair and balanced season, we have completely removed any amount of interest given to nations for storage of money in your EMR. This may one day make a return, but it will be in a much more restrictive form if that day ever comes. Energy Income Revisit. Yet another method of mass-produced wealth in last season of TCS came in the form of income coming directly from the production of oil, coal, natural gas and nuclear materials. This would mean that even if you were overproducing and had no one to sell your oil to, you'd be making exorbitant amounts from it on top of any income you made trading it on the international market. For this reason, you now only make income in two ways from energy production. The first is intuitively the international market, where you may freely sell to any nation at any price, assuming you have the other player's consent in RP agreement. The second, however, is selling to your domestic market. Now don't worry, you do not need to do anything to reap this new feature's benefits. Instead, you just simply fulfill your deficit, and for every barrel of oil equivalent you fulfill, your energy company will make money at a rate of the production price of oil or coal or whatever material, with a 10% profit margin. This should allow nations who are self-sustainable but not exporters to continue to grow their oil industry without having to subsidize. Consumption-based population growth. In the last season of TCS, it was noted how easy to come by population growth had been, and quite concerningly, it was first discovered that having larger consumption of food had negative effects on the growth of your population. Instead, your population growth usually based upon the amount of spare food your nation had in surplus, as opposed to how much was being consumed by the average person in your nation. This has now been reversed, and wasting food is a net negative, whilst fulfilling your dietary needs is a net positive. Stock market investment. In previous seasons of TCS, it has been greatly profitable from a GDP standpoint to receive large amounts of foreign investment. This, however, has not so much been the case with stock market growth, which would previously only receive a fifth of the benefit from foreign investment when compared to the GDP benefit. This has now been equalised, and both GDP and stock markets will receive the full 2% growth whenever your foreign investment has been maxed out. Crime system made eye-pleasing. After years of being, in my opinion, the worst looking sheet on TCS, I can finally say I have made the crime system fall in line with other systems in actually looking somewhat okay. So whilst functionality is still not at a level which I am pleased with, at least it's not a migraine-inducingly ugly. TCS Season 14 Additional Information. Before heading immediately into the new features of the season, I want to discuss some pretty important and basic information about the new season. Possibly the most important piece of information I have for you is the fact that River and I have agreed to bring back the early Season 13 policy of 4-day year changes. This means that each year should last approximately 96 hours with 4 full days between each transition from one year to the next. Year changes, as with before, will be conducted at or around 12 AM BST, which equates to 1 AM Central European Standard Time and 7 PM Eastern Time. Whenever British summertime transitions back to Greenwich Mean Time due to daylight savings, this will go back an hour to be 12 AM GMT. Additionally, I'd like to introduce the following nations as now being playable as of TCS Season 14. The Alawi dynasty, aka Morocco, replaces Cuba. Afghanistan replaces the German East African colony. South Africa, or the Cape Colony, replaces the German West African colony. Paraguay replaces Bhutan. Hello and welcome to a tutorial of TCS Season 14's new and improved food system. This system expands upon the previous system, which used to be purely based on agriculture and did not factor in anything else except essentially basic crop farming. We now have separated food into 5 distinct categories. Grain, which covers your wheat, your rice, your everything made from grain, so bread and what have you. Fruit and vegetables, which covers fruit and vegetables. Animal products, which covers anything meat, dairy, eggs, anything that comes from animals or animals themselves. Fish, which is fish, and processed foods, which refers to tinned foods, preserved foods, dried foods, that sort of stuff. Now, we start here on this overall desired diet, which is one of the important parts of the process of handling your food. Now, I've already done the food for the United States. However, I will go through what I've done so it makes sense to you. So as we can see here, this is the overall desired diet of the United States of America. This is what the average citizen expects to be eating over the course of a year. They expect 60% of their diet to be grain, or around 60%, 25%-ish to be fruit and veg, 10% to be animal products, 2.5% to be fish, and 7% to be processed foods. Moving on from this, we see subsidization. This can be changed in the AM column of the government tab. You can either pick low food subsidization, medium food subsidization, heavy food subsidization, or government-run food industry. What this does is it changes what percent of the wages you cover within your food industry. So on low, you cover 25% of the wages, which is that for the UK. On medium, you cover 50% of the wages, which is that for Austria-Hungary. And I don't believe anyone's on heavy. However, if you had a heavy, you'd be covering 75% of the wages. And on government ran, you cover 100% of the wages. Now, you may think, why would you ever want to be covering these wages? For nothing. So what you do is you get a benefit out of it. As you can see here, this is the max between desired diet and consumption. Over here, in the distribution of consumption, you set what your actual diet is. This is what your people will actually be receiving on their plates, what they'll be eating, what the majority of food production companies will be providing your people and your shops to sell to people. Now, while you're on no subsidies, this can differ 5% from the desired diet we spoke about earlier. So if grain is 57%, then we can go to a maximum of 62% without angering people. If it goes red, that means that you are bypassing this law, which is illegal under sheet rules. So here, this is where you define what foods are being consumed, and so this 62% means that 62% of the total food consumed within your nation will be in grain. So 27 million is effectively how much is being produced consumed, sorry, by your people. Now, if we go over here to land area distribution, this is where you can control the free, cheaper, or well, the free basic food types, I'll call them, the free farming-based food types. So essentially, you appropriate a percentage of your arable land. So over here, you can see the US in the land area tab has dedicated 6% of its maximum 12% of arable land. This is land that can be used for logging, mining, farming. Logging and mining referring to raw material production in the resources tab. This is a percentage of your land area, and you cannot directly influence this. However, through RP, there are times when you can influence this. So 6% is the amount that the United States has. And so you effectively, this will be 40% of the 6%, which equates to, so that is 227 square miles is 6% of the available land area. And that is resulting in 40% of this going towards grain production. Now, with 40% grain production, if I increase this to 50%, you'll notice the workers increase, so more workers in the fields producing the grain, which costs more wages if you're subsidising. But also the production increases, so this is more grain being produced as a result of the amount of workers that you have. Workers each cost the GDP per capita of your nation as their wage, and they produce a different amount, which scales up with your R&D per capita, as well as each year, if we look here, the grain will increase by 10 grain per square mile each year, against just a generic technology is improving arbitrary statistic. This works exactly the same with fruit and vegetables and animal products, though I will mention fruit and vegetables is by far the most expensive per ton, with 500 workers needed for 1 square mile. And animal products use up grain, which can, of course, scale up the price overall. So this price per ton is not the true price when you account for grain. Now moving on to fish production. This is essentially you appropriate an amount of fishing boats, which you can construct in the Dockyards tab, which will be explained later on in this video. So the US has 9,267 available fishing boats. They are dedicating all of them towards fishing. You don't have to dedicate all of them. As you can see, I, as France, am only dedicating around half. So now if we scroll over to the fish production, we can see that this is producing 934,000 fish, and we consume 911,000. That means we are in a surplus, and that means that fish is covered. We are providing the fish. We can also see this overfishing rate. Overfishing rate determines the effect that fishing is having on your population of fish. If we scroll far to the far left, we can see the fish population growth rate is here. Anything over 50% overfishing rate will result in a negative effect to your fish population, and anything below 50% will result in a positive effect, with 0% equaling 5%, and I guess 100% would be, I think, 10%. Minus 10%, that is. So now if we scroll back over here, that is our fish explained. You can see nations like this. This is illegal. You cannot do over 100%. This needs to be corrected prior to the upcoming year change. But nations like Germany are doing 76%, so they are losing fish population. Nations like France are gaining population because they are less than 50%. This is a very long-term thing. It is not going to have a huge impact most of the time, with like 0.97 and 2.62. There are very minor effects that happen. And your fish population, while it is tracked on sheet, it is not displayed purely because it is more an overload of information. It is tracked in tonnage, not the amount of fish, so it gets confusing. And just overall, it's very arbitrary and you can't get much from it. So it is hidden for simplicity's sake. You just need to make sure population is increasing and that your overfishing rate is where you want it to be. Moving on to food processing. Food processing is a mixture. It can both be a item in your standard diet. So 7.5% of the average American's diet is processed foods. This is any foods that have been preserved, canned, dried, like the food that is meant to last a longer term than you'd expect. As you can see, we're producing 2.9 million and we are consuming 2.8 million, so we have a surplus once again. Processed food utilizes manufactured goods to refer to things like cans for canned food and other similar, like packaging essentially for the foods to keep them preserved and processed. Now, while it's 3.6 per ton for this, because it uses a limited number of workers, as it is mainly done in a factory, this is stacked on top of whichever price you are using to produce your foods. Food is processed on a 1-to-1 scale, meaning if you invest 2.9 million fruit and vegetables into food processing, you will get 2.9 million processed foods. The second benefit of processed foods, outside of just generically being in your diet, moves us into the food storage tab. Essentially, as we can see with France here, so you can store two types of food, processed foods and grain. France is investing into constructing grain silos, which will have the capacity for 100,000 tonne of grain. This is costing $25 million for this construction. If you increase this number, which you can't increase, but as an admin, I'm increasing to display the effect, we can see that you lose a certain portion of your grain storage each year. Now, moving over to... Oh, also, it costs you some money to maintain having food within your storage. On the right side, this works entirely the same, but at different prices, around double the price it seems to construct. And once again, if we do that, you see it ticks down. Seems to be at a slightly slower rate than prior, and it costs less to maintain in the long term. So, costs more to maintain grain silos, but it's cheaper to construct them. Costs less to maintain processed food storage, but more to construct the warehouses for them. To move on now, that would be, I believe, the last piece of useful information I have is this is your surplus. Essentially, you want your dietary fulfillment always be 100%. This is essentially just making sure that you have a surplus. This is what determines everything. So at 90%, you will get 10% of the effects of not feeding your people. So 10% of starvation issues, 10% of the distant issues. If you've got 0%, which no one seems to have, you will receive the full 100% effect of starvation, and your nation will very quickly collapse. So do ensure that your food is fulfilled as much as you ever can. That is all for the food system. Good luck using it. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Discord or just ask in the general channels in TCS. Welcome to the new and improved Dockyards tab for TCS Season 14. This tab has effectively replaced the original Trade Ships tab. However, it maintains a lot of the same functionality, but it's basically been expanded upon and made easier to use in most ways. Now, this tab does come in the form of two tabs, the Dockyard tab and the Dockyard Math tab. However, it has been attempted to be designed in a way where you do not usually need to consult the Dockyard Math tab unless you really want to micromanage and get this perfectly maxed out for the best. To start out with, you can see the totals of ships that you have. The amount of trade ships you have determines how much you can import into your country by a ship before it starts costing you, as you can see in here, in terms of rentals. You rent out ships. Some nations will also gain positives from having ships available to be rented, but most of the time people are paying rentals out. Fishing boats, this as mentioned in the food tab, this determines your capability to produce fish. Dockyards cover the amount of dockyards that you have. A dockyard can either produce a single trade ship each year, or it can produce your cargo capacity divided by 20, I believe, fishing boats. So it's not set in stone, but you can get a vague idea. As you can see over here in the dockyard distribution, we are dedicating 90% of our 30 dockyards, as the US, into trade ships constructed, so that is giving us 27 trade ships each year, and we are dedicating 10% into the fishing boats constructed, which has given us 768 fishing boats this year. Now, an important thing to note is that while this looks great, having 768 fishing boats constructed this year, we are actually just about increasing by around 200, because each year the maintenance for fishing boats means fishing boats are lost. Same with trade ships. As you can see, 420 to 426. Despite building 27, we are losing a considerable amount of them, and as a result, we're only getting around 6. The specifics to all of this can be seen in here if you do wish to get into the details. This is all very complex. It's up to you if you read it, but that is the most effective way of using it, of course. You can also see like the individual cost per ship, the amount you're spending on ships, the individual cost per dockyard, the amount you're spending on dockyards, the individual cost per ton of capacity, which to cover capacity real quick, cargo capacity is here. It defaults to 5,000 for every nation. This is the amount of tons that can fit on each ship for your trade. And it determines the total amount that you can import before you start paying rental. Ships can also be traded on the Trade Agreements International Market tab, just by inputting trade ships or fishing boats, as you would. Although, of course, this costs one nation ships, and it gives another nation ships. Your ship type affects what fuel it uses, as well as its capacity effectiveness, because essentially certain ships can go around the world more times in a year than others. The options for this are pre-steam sail or coal right now. After 1920, oil will become available, and after 2020, electric ships will become available. You can also see your total construction cost here. You can see the value of your trade here. You can see the total cost of dockyards here, which I believe does not get covered on here. So there will eventually be something here that tells you how much this is costing you. However, for now, you'll just have to base it on the Dockyard Math tab, because that's just an oversight that's been missed. Anyway, that seems to be the Dockyard tab covered and sorted, so enjoy using this tab. Good luck with it. Again, any questions, just let me know. And yeah, moving on. With all that said and done, I hope this video has been helpful, enjoyable, and just generally useful. If you have any questions, as I said, ask me in my DMs, or you can mention it in general, and I'm sure I'll notice, as well as other experienced players. So I hope that you have a good Season 14, and I hope everything is clear to you now. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.